You just asked when we start. What are you talking about? What are you talking about? Yeah, I know, right? Yeah, I'm sorry. I mean, there's still a lot of so you guys
Still a few chairs left.
Yeah, we just try to name and
oh no. Yeah.
just try to
Yep. So you haven't tried to log in before with Teams or? Well, I actually don't know about your logins. You're supposed to have received that. So you haven't received logins for the computer systems?
Just our regular
It's the same.
name and yeah.
But you can't enter with your normal code? These computers are completely new, so there may be some problems, and I would actually advise you to bring your own laptops if possible.
Yeah.
But of course they should be top tuned, so if you can get in. I see most of you. Welcome to this first class in language processing. 3 hours in a row we're going to have. And I think we're going to arrange it so that we take only one break, sort of 1.5 hours or 1 hour and a quarter, something like that. And then we will maybe start a little before 1 so that you'll have time. Do you have classes later today? Okay, you have your lunch after the class then. But anyway, we'll start a little before 1. And I'm Glenn Sanford Peterson, teaching this class together with Nick. Maybe you will start with a short presentation of yourself, or you already know HECTAG?
From the math crash course, most of you, I think. Yeah, well, I'm Hector. You can mispronounce my name the way you want. I'm originally a computer scientist, and I studied linguistics, and I will be assisting the letter with more sort of more technical areas of the subject.
And I'm Glenn Sanford Peterson, a professor at the Center for Language Technology, and Hector and I are working together in some lexical semantic stuff also, and also collaborating on this, teaching this class. So hopefully we'll get some nice time together, and you'll learn a lot. I was thinking, we could maybe start out by going briefly through the plan, the semester plan for the course. And then I would also like that you introduce yourself, tell me a little bit about your background, because I understand that it's a quite mixed class with different kinds of backgrounds, and we're actually used to that, and that's of course the challenge of each course, to find the balance between some of you who have maybe not studied linguistics before, and some of you have not done a lot of programming before, so we'll try to find a compromise between the two. I also understand that you are in some working groups, and are these working groups sort of also a combination of different qualifications? Yeah, so you can help each other in the working groups, that would be very good. But anyway, the plan in this class is that you deliver your sort of assignments individually, but that you help each other in the process as far as you can. Okay, let's just look into the plan, which is on Epsilon, and everybody has access now to the course in Epsilon, right? Yeah. I found out that around half of you seem to be assigned to the wrong faculty. When I look you up in Epsilon, it says the bio and naturvidenskab faculty or something like that, which is surprising to me, and that's probably why several of you have had problems signing up for the course. Yeah?
Yeah, I have.
You still have problems? Okay, send me an email and I will add you to the course. That I can do it right away. Anyway, I asked Costanza, who's sort of responsible for these things, and she will try and find out why that has been the case. So none of you actually have any idea why that's the case? It seems maybe the international students have been put into the wrong box. But anyway, we'll try and sort that out. And actually, now that we're speaking about Epsilon, only a certain percentage of you have uploaded a photo. Please upload your photo. It does make it a little easier to keep track of everything. You do that by clicking over here.
I made a post about it on Facebook, how to do it, like step by step. We have like a Facebook group.
Yeah.
I made a post about it. So
please look it up and put your photo on. So this is also where I could see that you, several of you were assigned to the wrong faculty. Some of you are assigned to two faculties. And I started wondering, oh, this is interesting. Why do we get so many students from this faculty? But it must be a mistake. I mean, what does Opinion say to this?
Is it not because of the revision and image processing class? That is
Yeah, but still you should be assigned to this faculty only, I would say. But I think Costanza will be sorting this out, because it could give you problems during the course and during other classes, other courses that you are assigned wrong as well. Okay. Anyway, we will be working mostly with these two books. This one can be bought in the bookstore, this one can be downloaded. And have you already downloaded NLTK now, all of you? The Natural Language Toolkit that this book sort of uses? Everybody? Okay, not all of you. Those of you who may have problems downloading it, ask your instructors for help if you can't. Or your co-students.
If you have downloaded Anaconda, are you all running on Python and Anaconda? Well, then you should have NLTK by default.
Okay.
Maybe not all the data that it comes with, but definitely NLTK itself.
Yeah. Because I think actually already next week you will be doing the first chapter, the first exercises in this book. So please check that it's running so that you won't get too surprised next week when you have a lot of things to do. Okay. a combination of linguistics and language processing. We'll try and go through sort of the most basic levels of linguistics, and for those of you who have a linguistic background, that would be the easy part. But I also know that for some of you who have not been working with linguistics, it can be quite challenging. And that's also why I've suggested this book, because it's a very nice background handbook to sort of look up different terms, different levels of linguistic analysis. It actually goes through morphology, syntax, semantics, discourse, pragmatics, all the kinds of aspects of linguistics that you would traditionally work with, and that you will also be dealing with in language processing. So today we'll start sort of with a few exercises and with an introduction. And we will also talk a little bit about language technology in society, how far have we come sort of with language technology applications and so on. And then next week Hector will take over and talk about corpora, types, tokens, frequency, keywords, term weight, and inverse document frequency. And already next week you will get your first assignment, which, as I mentioned, you will deliver individually via Epsilon. And you will have only 1 week for that one, it seems. Yeah. You will have 1 week for that assignment. It's not too hard. And please deliver on time. This is a big class and it's a big job for us to go through all the assignments, so please deliver so that we can sort of take them all in one go. Because we would also like to respond to you individually and actually give you personal feedback on each assignment. Then we will, after morphology, we will move into syntax, and we will have 4 classes, or 4 lessons on syntax. Try and both work a little with linguistic analysis, but also, of course, look at the language processing techniques to deal with syntax. Then we'll have the autumn vacation, and actually, yeah, you get the next assignment already.
Week 40, I think, right?
Sorry?
Week 40.
Yeah. Yeah. So there'll be quite a lot of work getting started with all the assignments, but I think we'll follow more or less closely. Then we'll have the autumn vacation, and then we'll move on to semantics, and we will have 4 classes of semantics. Work with lexical semantics, with semantic roles, with word sense disambiguation, with distributional semantics, different ways of treating meaning in language, you could say. And finally, there will be 2 classes, one on child language acquisition and one on discourse. And we will end with a recap just before Christmas, where we sort of go briefly through the material again. All in all, you will be doing 4 assignments. And once these have been done and approved, you've passed this exam. And that usually goes well for most people. Of course, you can run into problems with parts of these, but try to help each other out. Discuss in the group the problems that you have. Don't sort of accept to get real stuck with the things. It's not really worth it. So, yeah. Any questions? Yeah.
If we don't have a group yet,
Yeah.
does anyone besides me doesn't have a group, a working group?
What's your name?
Selma.
Selma. Yeah, I know. Okay, so you're not part of the IT and Cognition. You're simply taking this course. I think you're maybe the only one. Is that correct? Or who else is not part of the IT and Cognition whole master's curriculum? Okay. So, could some group invite Selma to join?
Especially a group that's a bit more technical, right?
Yeah. Yeah, because you have a literature background or something. Yeah.
You can be in all.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, it's good. Okay. Then I think I would like a brief introduction of you, because this is a huge group of people, and I would really like to know a little about where you come from and what your background is. I have the list here, but I thought we could probably take a brief round, maybe starting with you. Okay.
My name is Tim. I study linguistics. I'm from Montreal.
Yeah. Okay. I'm providing a few notes. Yeah.
Yeah, my name is Steven. I study systems engineering from Los Angeles.
Yeah.
I'm Laura. I'm from Bulgaria but studied in communication sciences.
Yeah.
My name is Akila. I'm from Denmark.
I think I've had you in the past. Yeah.
I studied English language and literature and now that I see I'm Julia from Rome and I studied there.
Yeah.
I'm Irina from Romania and I studied psychology.
Psychology. Yeah.
I'm Sarah. I studied at the University of Edinburgh and did computer science.
I'm Kolan. I have a background as electronics engineering from DTU here in Denmark.
Hi, I'm Kazan. I was studying ICT engineering at the Lee University in Horsens.
Yeah.
I'm Roman. I'm studying linguistic typology in Moscow State University for Humanities.
And your first name is?
Roman.
My name is Vlad. I studied Russian and English philology and linguistics and linguistic typology at the same university as well.
Okay. Yeah. So you know each other, yeah? Yeah, and Selma?
Yeah, I'm Selma and I'm studying literature here on the University.
And your plan is only to take this course, not any of the others? No. Yeah?
I'm Daniela and I studied international information management in Germany with focus on information science and computational linguistics. And
My name is Ken Kenneth. I have a background in psychology.
Place. I studied computer science at Copenhagen University.
Yeah?
I'm Mandy. I studied linguistics in the University of Aberdeen.
Yeah? And your name again?
Nino. E-R-I-N-E.
Yeah?
I'm Nils. I'm background in politics and some IT. I have background in politics and some IT.
Yeah?
Hi, I'm Anka. I come from Romania, but I studied global business engineering
So, this is really a broad, mixed group, I must say. I hope you can really inspire and learn from each other, because there's a lot of competences here.
Hi, I'm Anna. I studied economics in Queensland, Australia.
I'm Mike, and I studied software engineering at the Technical University of Denmark.
Yes, that's what I know.
Hi, I'm Alma. I studied mathematics and I'm the same.
Hi, I'm Suresh Lulu.
those languages? I don't think I have them.
In IT,
This is great. I mean, I think we can really get some nice discussions here with this very mixed group of competencies. So I'm looking forward.
Excuse me, may I ask you, what's this camera doing here? I just wanted to know.
Can you explain?
Some of my students haven't still arrived, but they asked me to record this lecture for them.
Okay.
So don't feel too shy to say anything. It'll be recorded and
No, but I just
I think you
it will not get published, I suppose.
Yes, of course.
Actually, we speak up slightly so they hear you on the land.
Okay, so we have 2 more students, and is there actually a chair for each of you? Is there a chair? Oh.
Could you repeat, please?
Is there a chair for you?
Yeah, thank you.
Okay, okay. And your name?
Starts with O. Everybody is the only one that starts with O. You can call me on.
Okay, and you?
Karin.
And your background?
Linguistics.
Linguistics. And did I get you?
Computer engineering, IT consultant, cognitive science.
Great, thank you very much. Okay, so let's move into the introduction. We usually put the slides on Epsilon under each week, like at least a few hours before class. Let's go for exercises and slides. So my plan today is to go through 3 different aspects of language processing. Start out by talking about different levels of linguistic analysis and their relevance in language processing and language technology. Then give a little history of language processing. And finally, talk about language technology in society. And hopefully you've been able to find these reports on the web. There's a link on the course plan. Have you been able to find these reports on that link? Yeah. And as you will see, there are 30 different reports from 30 different languages, and I was thinking you could look into a report which reports on a language that somehow interests you, either your native language or just the language that you're working with. There should be, among those 30 languages, at least one of the reports that are relevant to sort of your background, hopefully. And we will do a little discussion in groups on this material. So this is actually the chapters that you will find more or less in this book. And it reflects, as I said, very well the sort of classical levels of linguistics that we work with in linguistics and that we are also reflected in language processing and language technology. So to some of you this will be all well known, and to some of you there will probably be a lot of terms that we have never heard before. But anyway, I'll go through, and you may ask if things are too unclear. So morphology is often the level of linguistics that we will start with, and we will also do that because that's about knowledge of the meaningful components of words. So we talk about words at word level when we talk morphology generally. Syntax is the knowledge of the structural relationships between words. Semantics is the knowledge of meaning. Pragmatics, the knowledge of the relationship of meaning to the goals and intentions of the speaker. Discourse, the knowledge about linguistic units larger than a single utterance. And then finally, we will also be talking about language and the brain and child language. And in parentheses I put phonetics and phonology, knowledge about linguistic sounds. There's a very nice chapter in the book that you can read, of course, but we will not be working particularly with phonetics and phonology, and will not either be working with speech technology, actually, not only in this class, but in general during your master. So you'll have to go to other places if you are interested, particularly in speech technology. So let's look a little into each of these levels. When we talk about the meaningful components of words and about the words in particular, we have at least a few relevant tools that we use in language processing, namely part of speech tagging and lemmatization. Have you come across part of speech tagging and lemmatization before? Yes. Well, we will move more into that next week when Hector will be teaching. But anyway, it's about guessing, for the machine to guess which word class a given word in a given context has. And lemmatization is about recognizing the lemma of a word that is declined in some way. For instance, knowing that men is a form of man. So the lemma of men is man, even if the two forms are not that easy to recognize. Relevance to language technology, where do we use morphology in general? Well, we use it in spelling checkers in particular. We need to incorporate some knowledge about morphology to do good spelling checkers. Word guessing devices, when you play WordView, for instance. Word games, integrated applications, machine translation, information retrieval, question answering will also include to some degree some morphological analysis. If we move on to syntax, it's relevant for parsing, being able to parse a phrase. You know what it means to parse a phrase? It means to analyze it syntactically. We will actually be doing that in a minute with some examples. And we use knowledge about syntax to actually make the machine parse phrases, be able to analyze what is the subject, what is the object in a given phrase, so on. Noun phrase recognition. Several systems do not provide a full analysis of a phrase, but only identifies the noun phrases, for instance, because noun phrases are usually where you find most content in a phrase. So in many applications you'll be interested in only getting out the noun phrases. And again, grammar checkers, and other integrated applications of different kinds will of course use syntactic analysis to some degree. You will also know that the grammar checkers often fail, at least the ones that we have for Danish, for instance, in Word. There's still a lot of work needed to be done in order to make the grammar checkers work. Probably it's better for English, but those of you who are native speakers of a smaller language, so to speak, than English will, I suppose, have run into a lot of problems with your grammar checkers, that they can't actually recognize the full syntax of the phrase. So there's still a lot of work for you to do when you finalize your master. Still a lot of applications that do not work 100% yet. What about semantics, the knowledge of meaning? Well, there are several applications where we need for the machine to some degree understand what's going on. We should maybe put understand in brackets because it's not understanding in the same way that we understand language, but several applications: machine translation, information retrieval, e-learning, question answering, dialogue systems, talking robots, avatars. A lot of the more complicated applications require some level of semantics, some level of understanding. So semantics includes a large spectrum of subtopics, you may say: inference, scope, quantifiers, truth conditions, compositionality, semantic parsing, linguistic ontologies, word nets, and so on. And we'll be going through most of these in class, since we have around 4 lessons on semantic topics. Pragmatics, knowledge of the relationship of meaning to the goals and intentions of the speaker. Well, automatic dialogue, analysis and generation, inference are examples here. Dialogue systems, again, and talking robots, avatars, need to be able to deal with the goals and the intentions of the speakers to actually perform in an appropriate way. We will not be working a lot with this topic, but we will touch upon it and look into some of the most popular theories in pragmatics. Finally, discourse, knowledge about linguistic units larger than a single utterance, relevance to language processing, well, something like anaphora resolution. If you have something pointing backwards, I was looking at the car, it was green and blue, or something like that, we would want to know what this "it" refers to in the previous sentence, for instance. And discourse structures can help us identify how these items in language refer to other items in previous text. Also text generation, how do you produce a text automatically? You need some discourse knowledge to do that properly in order to get actual acceptable an acceptable piece of text. Also question answering, automatic summarization requires some, or are improved by more discourse knowledge. And finally, phonetics and phonology, knowledge about the sounds in language, is relevant to speech analysis and generation, which of course, if you work with dialogue systems where you actually speak to the system, you would of course need some speech technology. Also talking GPS systems, talking robots, avatars, of course work with phonetics and phonology. And I've also put the cognitive aspects, language and the brain, child language. It's a discussion that we have a lot in language technology. How close should language technology systems be to the way that we process language? I mean, will the systems perform better if they use the same techniques as we use with our brains when we use and understand language? We'll talk a little bit about that also. And I suppose that will also connect very well to the classes we have in cognitive science. Okay. One thing that we will run into during all our lessons is the aspect of ambiguity. It's a very central parameter in language processing. It's almost always there. We may not be conscious about it, but when we see the machine work with language, we will become conscious sooner or later, because it turns out that there are a lot of ambiguities that we solve without even thinking of it, because the context helps us very easily analyze what's going on or interpret a certain phrase. Whereas for the computer, we generally need to feed in a lot of information, a lot of world knowledge actually to solve these ambiguities. I was thinking we could maybe work through these examples to actually see what kind of ambiguities are present here in the example I made for the duck. So let's. So there are several ways you can analyze it. It can either mean I cooked waterfall for her. And if we try and analyze that phrase with that meaning, the meaning A, we will have a sentence. We will have an NP with which is a pronoun. So what I'm doing now is actually I'm passing, I made her duck from one perspective, so to speak. And we'll try and see the different ways that we can actually analyze it. So we have the pronoun I here as the subject. So the subject of this phrase is I, and that's actually the case for all the ways that we can analyze it. Then we have a verb phrase with the verb to cook. To cook. And then we have, well, in this first interpretation, what function would her have? Any of the linguists here?
Like a recipient?
Yeah. A recipient or kind of indirect object, you could also say. Oh, it should be cooked, it should be made. Can you read this? Yeah. And what about the duck? What syntactic role would that have?
Object.
The object. So that would be one interpretation, one syntactic structure that would fit the first interpretation. And the verb, what would that actually mean if we were to give the lexical interpretation of make here?
To cook?
Yeah, that would actually mean to cook. So let's put cook in parentheses here. So we all agree that that is the meaning that we read into cook in this phrase. So that would be A. So what about the next one? I cook waterfall belonging to her. Well, a lot of this would be the same. But the last part here would have to change for that interpretation to work out. Because her duck, what kind of analysis would we now give to this structure? Yeah, Priscilla.
That's now a noun phrase. So her duck, she's the possessor of the duck. She's got her.
Yeah, so we have a kind of a specifier which is a positive pronoun. And then we have the noun phrase. Can you all see this difference? Or I maybe should have wiped out the first one. That was probably a mistake for me. But in the first one we had two different entities with two syntactic functions. The one was the indirect object, the other one was the object. In the next phrase we have one noun phrase which is the object. So this is what we'd like the machine also to see and to analyze, but of course we would also like it to be able to disambiguate in context. Let's look at C. I created the duck she owns. What kind of analysis would we give to that one? Any suggestions? Exactly. It's actually the same structure, but the lexical interpretation is different because now it's not cook, but create. So can you see that we are both dealing with some structural ambiguities here and some lexical ambiguities, which is quite complicated to actually solve this ambiguity automatically. And it's also quite hard sometimes to actually see the ambiguity. Now we're actually forced into doing it because we have all the interpretations written up here. But in usual language, we mostly don't actually see the problem. But it's really there when we want to do some automatic processing. Okay, what about D? This is quite different. I caused her to quickly lower her head or body. Now it's meaning something completely different from the first one. Yeah, Sarah?
You have another verb in this interpretation, so it's you've got an embedded clause.
I think I'll draw another one now to be able to actually.
So you've got make and duck. They're two different.
So we still have the make here. Then we have the I here. And what happens now?
You need a new sentence.
A new sentence.
A new clause within the sentence.
With a noun phrase and a verb phrase. And her is the logical subject, so to speak, of the ducking. So can you all see this difference in meaning? Okay. And the last one. I waved my magic wand and turned her into an undifferentiated waterfowl. Would require very specific context to actually see this. But how would we analyze it? Any of the linguists want to join in here? It's probably not that easy, but
it's a lexical ambiguity again, isn't it? It's a different reading of make.
Yeah.
As in turn into.
Yeah, that's one thing. So we have another lexical interpretation of make, but we also have another structure. We haven't seen this structure before, as far as I believe.
Her. Her, the word her, in this case changes the meaning. I'm not a linguist, I don't know how it exactly changes, but I believe it changes its function.
You're not sure, we're still referring to a female person. So, what do you say?
I think maybe you mean that in this case she is the one that's been acted upon instead of being the recipient.
Yeah.
She
So the role is different. You could say her role is a little different.
Yeah, exactly.
So we have still an NP and a VP, and then we have the V made. But in this case, made means change into. And then we have an object, her. So now she is actually the object here. And then we have duck. What role would that have here, or syntactic function? It's still a noun. I think it has the function of attribute to the object. It's kind of predicative. I made her into duck. So we would have an attribute to the object here.
Could you maybe use the blackboard?
Or wheel that attitude?
Should I use the blackboard instead?
It's a bit difficult to see what it's
Yeah. Okay. So E would be something like this. I use the triangle when I don't care to write all the details. It's a nice. So it's made when we change into something, and we have an object, which is her, and we have an attribute to the object. So we change her into an object. So that was a lot of different analysis, both at the lexical level and at the structural level. Actually, I have now drawn 4 different structural analyses, and I think we have had 1, 2, 3 or 4 lexical readings.
Should also be some karate pro and her coach made. Is that the famous stuff that she has? Or it's just the same as the first one? Just a different.
Couldn't there be a forced her to duck?
Sorry?
couldn't there be a kind of forced her to duck and not just cause her?
Oh, you mean GSD or?
Lexical. Yeah, it's a different lexical.
Yeah.
That's very slight.
It's actually a little infinite in a way, the number of lexical interpretations that you could read into the phrases depending on the context. But I think these are the most sharply clear distinctions that we will find, or interpretations that we can make. Yeah?
I was thinking about the first interpretation. Shouldn't be I made her aid.
Sorry?
When in the first interpretation,
aid
shouldn't be I made her aid.
It doesn't have to.
It doesn't have to be a whole duck.
Huh?
If you said that, there would be a whole duck. If I say this like, well, I was coming for dinner. I made her a duck. Maybe I just bought like
the ties. Or
like you're treating the duck as substance and not as a unit.
No, I'm not a native speaker, so I'm not sure about it. But I just thought it like it sounded to me more correct.
Like if you use another word, say I made her lasagna, kind of the same concept. I made her duck.
Okay.
But I think perhaps this distinction is quite important in the last sentence. I mean, right? If you say I made a duck, then you're saying I made her into a part of a duck. And if you say I made her a duck, then you're saying I made her turned her into a whole duck. So
yeah, that's right.
It's really a weird way to read.
Yeah, I mean it would really require a very specific context.
You can't really generalize
duck
to just
no, that's true.
the species.
Yeah. Anyway, I think we're sort of bumped right into another discussion on ambiguity here, and we will be working with ambiguity at the different levels in the different lessons that we have. Some of them relate to syntactic analysis, some of them are more related to lexical semantics. Okay. So I think before we have a break, I will run through a little history of language processing. See what happens. And I'm actually following a little speech and language technology book, speech and language processing book that I'm also referring to, which is also available on the web. The first chapter here gives history. You could speak of an early period, 57 to 70, where you have maybe two competing approaches, a symbolic versus a stochastic approach to language processing. And you could say that Chomsky stands for the rule-based approach in opposition to statistical engineering, where you work the statistics of text and do language processing from that perspective. I'll talk mostly here about the symbolic or the Chomsky approach. It will probably be the first and last time that you will work with Chomsky during your IT and cognition classes. We're not directly referring a lot to Chomsky, but indirectly I think it's important part of the paradigm that we're still working with in language processing. So I'll be saying a little bit about Chomsky. If you're more interested, you can study some of his works. But I think we must admit that from a very technical point of view, we have sort of left several of his ideas and are working more with the statistical approaches today. But still, there are some very important aspects that I think you should know of and that will make you maybe understand some of the other things that we'll be doing. It's a psychologically well-known and highly used paradigm, the formal language paradigm. It models syntaxes and semantic phenomena which are difficult to explain in other language models. So when Chomsky came around with his formal language paradigms, he was able to formally explain some of the ways that we can work with language, especially structurally. It's quite a widely used theory in several of our neighbor countries, not so much in Denmark. There are very few people working with Chomsky's work today in Denmark. There's Sten Wigner at Aarhus University is one of the old ones. But in Sweden and Norway and Germany, the formal language paradigm in terms of Chomsky's so-called generative grammar is still quite popular as a as a theory of language. Much rule-based language processing is based on the formal language paradigm. So here is Chomsky. He is credited with the creation of the theory of generative grammar, considered to be one of the most significant contributions to the field of theoretical linguistics made in the 20th century. And you will also know him from psychology and philosophy, but we will mostly look at his work within what we call, which has caused interest in computational linguistics, namely classification of formal languages in terms of their generative power. And he's actually the most cited humanistic researcher in this period, and very cited and still working, I think. Isn't he?
Still around.
He's still around, and he's still discussing politics and yeah.
Yeah. And the leftist among you might also know him because he's very engaged in politics.
Yeah. I've left wing as far as I know. So Chomsky's work was one of the first serious attempts on the part of a linguist to construct within the tradition of theory construction a comprehensive theory of language, which may be understood in the same sense that a chemical biological theory is ordinarily understood by experts in those fields. So these language theories were very much accepted in sort of the science community because it had some of the nice formal aspects that you would find in traditional science. So he had great impact in the development of the general formal language. He's known for a few very famous concepts. Universal grammar, about our innate ability to learn languages. I will not say a lot about that. I don't know if you still work with him in psychology. Who has a background in psychology? Or is he even mentioned there? Or no? No. Probably. Are you working a lot with language in psychology or no? So that's probably. Also the concepts competence versus performance is something that Chomsky is well known for, that we have this innate competence of understanding and using syntax, and that linguistic form can be described independently of communicative functions, so to speak. It's like an independent system that we can handle and explain, and not related, or it is of course related, but you can work at it in isolation from the communicative function. And syntax can be described by means of symbolic language with mathematical precision. That's what is so central about the formal syntactic paradigm. So he claims that syntax is autonomous, independent of meaning, and can be examined as an independent system, and it is unique for man to have this grammatical competence. A very famous example of Chomsky is the example colorless green ideas sleep furiously, which is syntactically completely acceptable, even if it doesn't really make sense semantically. So this is a phrase that he made up to actually show this difference in our grammatical competence, which enables us to analyze phrases like this without actually understanding them. In contrast to this last phrase, furiously sleep ideas green colorless, which is just seems to be an arbitrary listing of words with no syntactic clue, so to speak. So the description of a language by means of a formal grammar can explain why we can produce an indefinite number of sentences from a finite number of words and a final set of grammatical rules. And that's of course also what has made it attractive for computational linguistics, that you could have a finite lexicon and a finite grammar, and then you could actually analyze and produce an infinite number of sentences. However, we always ran into problems because it always turned out that the lexicon was not that finite, and the same for the grammar. That language was more variable and more flexible that you would actually maybe foresee in the rules. And that's, yeah. That's why this approach generally runs into problems if you want to make robust language processing systems because it's words are changing all the time, new words are coming in. People tend to use language in a very variable way, especially if we talk about spoken language. There may be some certain pattern of syntactic rules that we follow, but we often make incomplete input in some way that is difficult to actually foresee in the grammar. But in theory, this is possible. So we can do this for phrases which have never been said before, and which means that we have not learned them from hearing them. So he was very much concerned about how we work with language in the brain, how we are able to produce sentences that we haven't heard ever before, and also interpret such sentences. There are a few terms which are quite central, and we will come back to in syntax and in different exercises that we'll go through in class. Word classes and their constituents, first of all. We'll go through the word classes next week. And also we'll quickly move into the constituents that these word classes can form. We've already been looking at sentences and noun phrases up here on the board now. Tree structures, also what I've drawn here are so-called tree structures. Rewrite rules, we'll have an example of that in a minute. Unification and subcategorization. And also transformations, which was something that Chomsky was very known for. The deep and surface structure, which we will not really be working a lot with in class, but I'd like just to mention it here today. Here are some examples of word classes: verbs, to be, to run, to remember; nouns, girl, box, bag, car, idea; adjectives, nice, old, green; adverbs, always, now, not; prepositions, in, out, by; conjunctions like when, since, and more. They can form constituents, verbal phrases, noun phrases, and adjectival phrases. So if we look at tree structures, words can be conceived as the terminal symbols in the tree, also called the leaves. You see the leaves here. Terminal symbols in the tree. And information about the words are given in a lexicon, where we would typically contain information like word class, morphology, inflections, valency, which can also be labeled or referred to as subcategorization, and finally semantics, like the semantic roles or the lexical meaning of the word. The grammar has rules that generate these tree structures. So actually, we could formulate a series of rules that could form the background for the trees that I have written up here. So if we have a phrase, it can be rewritten as a noun phrase and a verb phrase, and that's what we saw here. And if we have a verb phrase, it can again be rewritten as a verb and a noun phrase. And so forth. The noun phrase can be expressed as a determiner, an adjective, and a noun. And the parentheses here denote optionality. There need not be an object to a phrase. That's where we put the parentheses. It's optional to have this object. Whereas for a sentence, it's not optional to have a verb phrase. It's obligatory for that phrase to be the correct one. Okay. I think we should maybe have a break here, and we will work a little with this formal grammar and lexicon after the break. So let's meet for 5 minutes let's meet in 15 minutes again.
One little thing, sorry. There are 3 or 4 of you that are assigned as my students to be supervised. Yeah, so if you want, we can do lunch together after class. So,
Just the sentence. Well, you're welcome to draw little trees. And maybe basically phrases that. What would it be?
Can we use that twice in one phrase?
Yeah. As many times as you want.
I know we can do it, Like I don't, I knew what I needed to know.
Yeah. You can use the words as many times as you like in each phrase. And actually, you don't have like
Quite a lot, man.
you can get some kind of idea of how
The way I can
But it's not
Yeah,
so how many? You can use the word. Okay, I don't know how much time. Would you like a few more minutes? Getting a feeling of the number of places. Okay, maybe we should have a few of them on the board. Maybe your group could start with a few of your examples. Just put them on the board if I can.
So for now, basically, number two now, but yeah, he's the president of our league. That reminds me of something. With them, but it's
Ну, кстати, не делаю. Что?
Last one. Yeah. Okay, now let's. No. So you're actually producing a fully correct phrase, but it's not accepted by our grammar. Why?
Because it starts with a verb and makes use of a determinant.
Maybe you can move slightly toward the projector so your classmates can see it.
So we're discussing the last phrase on the board here. What can be said about that phrase related to the grammar?
Sorry, can you say that again?
E and P as a subject, so the grammar doesn't generate E for that.
So, do any of you know how you could change the grammar to make it generate that sentence? If you just you could get access to the computer and change that description, so you could change something to make the.
You can make the MB in the sentence level optional.
Exactly. So you put brackets on the first rule, right?
Yeah.
If you put brackets around the first MP, then you will be able to generate sentences in imperative.
And of course, if you would want a grammar that is robust, that can actually run all the phrases that we find acceptable in language, we would need to somehow incorporate the imperative mode in our grammar. Eventually by means of optionality of the subject. But it's not really the most sort of... in written language you will not find it a lot, but of course in spoken language it will be quite good. Okay. Maybe one or two more phrases. Okay, thank you. I think if you put a parenthesis around the imperative phrase, because that one actually doesn't work with this grammar. Obviously, it works with our grammar. I mean, it's a fully correct sentence. Okay, thank you. Maybe we can have a few other kinds of phrases. Who would like to volunteer? You?
Can I just say, I'm getting it to 534 sentences.
Yeah.
So do you want us to write them all?
No. Relax. I just wanted a few different kinds on the board that we can discuss what can be done with. So,
yeah, but
how did
there's one where you don't have the NP at the end, I think. So that makes like 32 more than the first 32 difference.
So how many you got in total?
534.
Sounds reasonable. It's quite impressive how much power this small grammar has, right? A lot of phrases can be generated. Let's get just a few more up on the board. Some phrases that are different from these in different respects. Maybe would you like to add a few?
Well, sorry. Sorry? Oh, yeah. And red,
Yeah. I think that's fine. We now have a rich impression of what can actually be going on. And what can we say about men eats?
It's not grammatical, it's grammar generated.
Yeah. It's ungrammatical to our belief or to respect to the grammar that we have inherently, or however we're working with it. But in this view of this grammar, it's actually correct. What kind of incorrectness could you label? Could you give it a label, this kind of incorrectness?
The first one?
Men eats.
Conjugation?
Yeah, it's lack of agreement between the subject and the verb here. So we would not like a singular form of the verb with the plural noun. Yeah, so that's at least one kind of problem, agreement, errors. What other kinds of strange phrases have you come up with? I think we haven't actually yeah, but we could also say the apple eats the man. What's wrong with that phrase? Is it syntactically wrong? No? No?
It's semantically wrong.
Semantically wrong. So we can have what we could call semantic hardness at least. We're not so happy to talk about errors when we talk about semantics, because usually if you have a very specific context, you could think of some way of an apple eating a man, I don't know, some computer game or something. So we usually talk about something is odd in a way, semantically odd. Yeah? Any other kinds of phrases which are strange that have popped up during your...
Yeah, the apples eats red men.
Sorry?
Apples eats red men.
Apple?
Apples.
Yeah.
Okay. Where is that accepted by your grammar?
Apple.
Which rule?
There's any way in the grammar that you can generate two nouns after each other.
Okay. So that's not accepted by your rules? Any other sentence types that we should get up?
Can we say just only eat apple?
Yeah. But that was actually what we had also in the imperative, that the grammar does not allow to generate a sentence without an NP in the beginning.
Without a noun.
Yeah, without a noun. So that's not accepted. But I think we could produce something like a man eats apple. Sorry. Yeah.
You could also put just apples eats.
Yeah.
Or apples eats apples.
Yeah, exactly. So we would both have some agreement errors and some semantic oddness here. Also the determiner. Sometimes we would really like a determiner to be there, so we could say man eat apple, but it doesn't really sound like real language. So, well, what can we conclude here? We can conclude that it's actually rather powerful, that we can generate a lot of phrases. You said something 500 something?
44.
Okay, 44?
I added 32 to 512.
Okay. So it's quite powerful, and actually it's in some respects too powerful, because it generates sentences that we don't find correct, but it's also not powerful enough, because we can think of examples like eat the apple, which are perfectly correct, but which cannot be generated by the grammar. So obviously, for this to work in real life, there need to be a lot of adjustments, extensions, and so on. And we could have just a brief look at some of the extensions that we could make to it. Yeah, so we've already discussed this. Any ideas of what we could do? No, we've already talked about what we could do to include eat the apple. We'd need another rule, simply, or we would need to make the subject optional, or the first NP optional. But what can be done to get rid of the errors here? Any ideas?
Within a lexicon, specify what agreement means.
Yeah. would be hard to specify in the lexicon the agreement rule, but we could at least express the number. Yeah. So we could express in our lexicon whether it's a plural or singular verb and noun. And then we could try and deal with it in the grammar. Because it wouldn't really help that we told, let's say, if we told the system that man is singular and men is plural, apples is singular, apples is plural, the verb eats is a singular form, eat is a plural form. That wouldn't really, we would still be able to generate the same phrases. So we've had to add something to the grammar as well to make it work.
Mm-hmm.
What could that be?
Agreement rules?
Agreement rules? Yep. We would have to add some agreement rules to the grammar. Or actually, we could do it by means of syntactic features. And let's have a brief look at how that could be. Because this is called a context-free grammar. We do not have... There's a lot of knowledge that we are not sort of using here. We don't deal with the knowledge of whether something is singular or plural. We can add that knowledge by means of features. Let's just have a look at how that can be done. Yeah. So wrong rules are generated because the grammar is context-free, and this can be overcome by developing context-sensitive grammars with features. And we will be doing this a lot in class in the coming weeks. You will be implementing formal grammars in NLTK, and you will be adding syntactic features, semantic features to certain degrees. So we'll not go a lot into it today, but hopefully this is giving you an idea of the kind of machinery that is needed in order to do this problem. And one important aspect that we need to deal with in order to integrate the features, the semantic and syntactic features, is unification. So linguistic features are unified in the sense that we get the information that two elements together provide, and this is called unification. So we can unify, for instance, morphological information. For instance, we could have a phrase like an apple, where we want to say that if it's an indefinite noun, which starts with a vowel, then we want to have an in front of it. And if, in the same way we have indefinite for apple, singular, and vowel, these two will unify into this composite thing here, an apple, indefinite, singular, and vowel. The same goes for the syntactic, the agreement errors. If we add the information that men is plural, and we also add it as a requirement on the verb that if men is plural, then the verb needs to be plural as well, then these two can unify, and we will accept only the grammatically correct phrases. You'll be working with this hand-on, and it will become more clear to you. The same goes for the semantic information. We had, well, we didn't get it up there, but if we have a phrase like the apple eats the man, did I pick that up? No.
The second one is red apple.
Oh yeah, oh sorry, it's that, yeah. The red apples eat the man, where we have this semantic oddness. We can add features to a grammar that say that eats takes an animated subject, and since apple is inanimate and man is animate, we will, and if we incorporate that in the grammar, we'll be able to get rid of phrases like the red apples eat men. In case that's what we want, of course, yeah?
But animateness of an object depends on context. If this was in Alice book, then it would be perfect.
Exactly, and that's one of the big problems when doing lexical semantics and semantics in general, that the context can override what we would call the prototypicality of a meaning. Because prototypically, men apples would not be eating men, it would be the other way around. And we have to stick to this prototypicality as a sort of basic feature when we make these grammars. And then we can maybe loosen our restrictions a little bit here and there in order to also incorporate what you could call the variability of language and metaphors. And I mean, metaphors are really cases where we usually break all the rules of semantics. But let's forget that just for a little while and try to stick to the prototypicality. Yeah?
But last we just had somebody using a wand to turn somebody into a duck.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, so metaphors come in everywhere, or whatever you call it. Yeah. So you will be building grammars that can reject these incorrect phrases of different kinds. Yeah. Okay. A few more things on some very central formal grammar terms. Subcategorization or valency. It's a way of describing valency. It's actually a term coming from chemistry, but we use it in linguistics.
What was that again?
Sorry?
The meaning of valency. What was that again?
What it is? Well, it means that some items connect other things, other items to it.
Valence in chemistry is the amount of free electrons that a certain element has. So for each electron you can establish a bound.
Right.
So
I meant in linguistics.
In linguistics. We'll give some examples.
You have two free electrons, just like you're a function with two arguments, and you can take two bound objects.
Yeah. So for instance, take has the valency of 2 here. It will take both a subject and an object in order to be grammatically and semantically correct, actually. So he takes the train. We can say that take subcategorizes for the subject and for the object. For instance, if we say he goes the train, again, it sounds strange because the sort of valency rules, or so to speak, are overridden if we use a verb with another valency connected. So we will say that he and the train are phrases that are subcategorized for by the verb. So the verb sort of predicts that we need a subject and an object, two different kinds of entities here. Whereas every day now and in Aarhus are seen as free modifiers which are not subcategorized for. So generally we will say that the governor subcategorizes for the valency bound phrases, which we also call the complements. And typical governors are verbs, nouns and adjectives, mostly verbs. But also nouns and adjectives can take other arguments. And some complements are obligatory and others are optional. What about the eat that we had up here? How many complements does eat subcategorize for?
2.
2. But are they both obligatory?
It's implied. Or
Implied?
You can use the 2 different readings of eat.
Yeah. Could you explain?
Well, the more traditional reading of eat is that it needs a subject and an object. So you need to eat something. But you can also think of a sentence where it's grammatically and semantically correct to say, I eat, or I'm eating.
Yeah.
Without
We
the
eat at
subject.
6 o'clock every night, for instance. It's completely well formed.
But it's implied semantically that you eat something.
Yeah, exactly. So eat differs from take in this respect. Because take does not have an optional object, really, does it? We can't really say he takes without having the object. So in this respect, the verbs are very different in the ways, the number of arguments that are categorized for, subcategorized for, and whether they are obligatory or not, and also what kind of material can fill in